So good morning, everybody. I'm Nicola Barrett, Chief Corporate Learning Officer of Emory Executive Education at Goizueta Business School. And thank you for joining us today for our Business Over Breakfast webinar series. As we move into February, and who can believe it's already February, we're continuing to explore the many questions organizations are tackling around problems of practice and issues of equity. If the past year has taught us anything, it's that it's important to always ask ourselves if we're both doing what's necessary to solve the problems of today and what's needed to ensure our organizations are prepared for tomorrow. Some of that work requires us to think deeply about the structures and systems we have in place to move our companies, our teams, and ourselves forward. To that end, we're lucky to have Dr. Randy Lucius with us today to explore this morning's topic, performance management and social justice. A little bit about Randy. He's been with Emory for over 7 years, actually, as the Director of Organizational Development. He's a licensed psychologist with a doctorate degree in industrial and organization psychology, and was previously president of the Atlanta Society of Applied Psychology. Prior to joining Emory, he worked as a consultant and has over 20 years of experience spanning a diverse set of areas, including executive assessment, coaching, job analysis, competency modeling, employee selection, litigation support, performance management, 360-degree feedback, frame of reference training, organizational restructuring, employee opinion surveys, personality assessment, and leadership development. Everything we need today, Randy. In addition to his consulting work, he was the research director for Fitability and vice president of the TurkNet Leadership Group. He's worked with numerous organizations of all sizes and types, from small firms to Fortune 500 companies, government agencies, and nonprofits, including executive education. We've had the benefit of having Randy work with the team over the last 18 months. Dr. Lucius is also the co-author of the Fitability 5, a personality-based assessment administered to over 250,000 individuals across the US. He's an excellent resource on all things performance management and human resources, and we're fortunate to have him with us today. Randy's going to spend the next 35 minutes or so sharing insights on the role performance management can play in ensuring equity in our organizations. And we'll end the session with a Q&A time. So please write your questions in the Q&A section at the bottom of the screen, and Ashley and I will do our best to feed those to Randy towards the end of the session. If you find this material and the session interesting, you can continue building and honing your leadership skills at an upcoming open enrollment program that we have around effective leadership through emotional intelligence. So that starts on March 2nd, and I encourage you all to check that out and see if that can help you build your leadership skills. At the end of today's session, there will be a short survey, so please stay on for probably take you no more than a minute to complete, and we will use that feedback for future Business Over Breakfast sessions. Enjoy the morning with Randy, and we look forward to continuing the conversation next week. Thank you. Thanks, Randy.
All right, thank you so much, Nicola. I really appreciate that warm introduction. I'll try my best to live up to the expectations you set. And thank you all for dialing in this morning. I really am thrilled to have you here. This is a topic I've been wanting to talk about for a while. So as shared, the title of our discussion today is Performance Management and Social Justice, with a subtitle there, The Past is Prologue. Performance management is one of the areas I manage, and I actually teach in this as well. And it's something I have been very familiar with and following for a long time. So before we begin going into any content, I want to ask you all a question. With one word, what do you think of when someone says performance management? If you would, go to your computers or smartphones to menti.com. You'll see a little window where you can punch in this code and that'll allow you to type in your response. Please try that now. Hug. More hug. Agonizing time suck. Fairness, grading, painful. Zzz. Well, it's really, the results are really flying in now. Brutal. Okay. Not frequent enough. Depends. Pointless. Brutal. I mean, there are some positive words here too. Feedback, motivation, some neutral words, evaluation, absolutely. Efficiency, growth. Oh, crack the whip. Ouch. All right. Pain. I see pain becoming a bigger word there. Painful becoming a bigger word there. Get through it. Yeah. Certainly a lot of negative connotations there. Some neutral words there, just descriptive of the process. Some words recognizing the positive aspects of it too. So I appreciate that. Wow, they're still coming in. There's certainly a lot of negative words that are associated with performance management, and I can't say at all that that's surprising. There's a lot of reasons for that. I understand, but let's talk about that, about why we have these negative connotations. But the positive ones are true too, about feedback and motivation. Absolutely. We'll talk a lot about that. The agenda I have for us today is to talk about performance management and these calls that are out there from some to change it. And the calls are out there because of these negative associations we have, and they're valid concerns that you expressed, all of them. But then I want to share with you my concerns about some of these calls for change. Specifically, one, I'm concerned that we're forgetting our past. Two, the fact that there are a lot of high stakes decisions that result from the performance management process. And three, there's a lot that the critics are not telling you, those that are publishing, because it has become a popular thing to write about in the press. And we'll then talk about best practices and why, in fact, they are best practices. And then I'll give you a summary. All right. So, similar to what we just saw in the word cloud, why is it that people complain about performance management? One, it's time consuming. One of the comments was it's a time suck. That's a common complaint. It can take a lot of time. That is absolutely true. I can't deny that. Especially if you have a lot of direct reports, it can be very time consuming. Another popular reason cited, I didn't necessarily see this in the word cloud, but it's absolutely true, is that a lot of managers have very little comfort with giving feedback to others, especially if it's feedback that's somewhat negative. I like the term constructive feedback. That's really the term that I prefer, and how it should be framed as constructive feedback to help others develop and grow. But there's some discomfort for many managers with giving that feedback, and sometimes they resort to other tactics rather than giving the feedback. They just give people a score that's higher than what they deserve. And related to that, there was a general sense from some that the process is biased, that it seems unfair. That it may feel unrelated to the job. There's a variety of reasons why it may feel that way. It could be, as I said a moment ago, that their manager is not comfortable giving truthful feedback, so they just give generic feedback and more positive scores than are warranted. It could be that there's a sense that scores are allocated for political reasons, so there's political motivations behind the scores, that they don't actually reflect the true performance of that person. And similar to what I was saying a moment ago, everyone, it feels like, gets the same score sometimes, again, depending on how it is administered. So Yeah, the time consumingness, the fact that it takes a lot of effort, the discomfort with it, those are all common reasons cited for, avoiding performance management, if you will. So there have been some organizations that have decided to do away with performance management altogether. Some of these have been written about in the press in the last 10 years or so. A few highlights here. One organization, Accenture, they decided it was simply too costly and that it didn't really drive better performance, in their opinion. Another was Adobe. They said, quote, it was a soul-crushing exercise, and it just doesn't feel good to people. Delta, the Texas Roadhouse, the Gap, they decided to transition to a goals-only type of approach, company and personal development, with regular check-ins, which are conversations. I'll talk more about check-ins in a moment. SAP recently said that it was too expensive for them, that it's a time-consuming and it's often demotivating. I find that one in particular very interesting because they actually own a very popular performance management software product called SuccessFactors. A survey that was done in 2015 by Conference Executive Board, which is now Gartner, of the Fortune 500 found that 6% of companies had plans to eliminate performance management, or at least numerical ratings in performance management, going to what some call a check-in approach, just conversations. And then a more recent survey, World at Work in 2018, found that 9% of organizations are eliminating performance management. So there does appear to be a possible trend towards doing away with performance management in organizations. Though I will also point out 91% are still practicing the more traditional approach, or at least what we know of as traditional. And I will share more about that later, but our understanding of what is the traditional approach also, in fact, has a lot of variations in it. So the alternative, I alluded to some of this, is to conduct evaluations as periodic conversations with no formal annual review, no numeric scores, just a conversation, like I said, with Adobe and Accenture. So it's actually just a qualitative approach rather than a quantitative approach. Some organizations, in addition to that, are just focusing on developmental needs, just focusing on the future needs of that person rather than their past performance. So there's much more emphasis on development and improvement, not what their current performance looks like. And related to that, focusing on the relationship between supervisor and employee and working together and how to improve that relationship. I've been doing some calls with different organizations of late, and I've discovered that some organizations are making this a voluntary process as well. Part of that is because of the additional strains put on by COVID-19 and in the current work environment, which has changed dramatically for all of us. And some organizations are unable to give merit increases. So they're making it voluntary for that reason. But nevertheless, there are organizations that are making it voluntary. So I want to share now with you my concerns with this type of approach that some of these organizations are moving towards. One, and the most important one, I fear that we're beginning to forget our past and why we put into practice all the things that we call best practices. Okay. I mean, social injustice, and I'm just talking after the end of the Civil War, has been an ongoing struggle for over 150 years. And certainly recent history has proven that we still have a long way to go. In fact, I found it shocking that prior to 1964, businesses actually advertised what race and gender were required, what they were looking for in job applicants. I want only this race, only this gender, only white females applying to this job, what have you, which younger people today for sure will find shocking. I still found it shocking, and I'm not that young anymore. But so prior to that, there were there are a lot of issues. There's still issues today, but 1964 may ring a bell for some of you because that's when the Civil Rights Act was put in motion. Jim Crow laws, resistance to desegregation, a general lack of social justice that was promised by the 14th Amendment were key sources of motivation for pushing this Civil Rights Act forward. There were a number of different titles in the Civil Rights Act, okay, that speak to different aspects of society. Title VII speaks to the workplace, and it outlaws employment discrimination based on race, sex, color, religion, and national origin. And there's since been additional things added. There was an update in 1991 to some of that, but not necessarily as much as you would think. It applies, the Title VII applies to the full spectrum of employment decisions, such as hiring, promoting, and firing. Most people, when they talk about Title VII, they just think of it in terms of hiring. You may have heard of terms like adverse impact or disparate treatment. But it applies to all aspects of the workplace, and promoting and firing. I've italicized those for a reason, because those are impacted by performance management. Hence, performance management is subject to all the same rules, guidelines, laws of the Civil Rights Act. So related to that, my second concern is that there are a lot of high stakes decisions that result from the performance management process. Some decisions that made include promotion, internal hiring, or lateral transfers. I mean, a lot of people, they will be in a job and stay with the same organization, but then apply to another job opening within that organization. It could be a move up, or it could be a lateral transfer by the performance management, and the previous ratings that person has received are used many times as a data point in making that decision. Demotions, terminations, whether or not to put someone on a performance improvement plan, it's not on there. Merit increases, development opportunities, and those development opportunities oftentimes then lead to promotions. All of those things are influenced by performance management, and not just influenced, are directly tied to it. And because of that, in conjunction with Title VII, there are legal consequences from not doing things a certain way, what I like to think of as the right way in conducting performance management. So that should catch a lot of people's attention. And I have, as Nicola stated, part of my background is litigation support, and I have served on cases that involved grievances and poor administration of performance management systems. So I've seen firsthand what can occur. Another concern that I want to share with you is that there's a lot of things that folks in the popular press are not telling you that you need to know about. Many of these performance management systems or processes that are being used in organizations, they're not what I call competency-based, meaning they don't really talk about all the different specific knowledge, skills, abilities, and other characteristics. Those collectively are what I call a competency. They're not tied to that. So David Shaw pointed this out a number of years ago with IBM and Conexa. Many of these organizations are just using one single overall rating. That's it. They're not really taking into account the complexity, the multidimensionality of performance. We're all more than just one single number. Simplifying it that way is really short-sighted. So many, in addition to that first concern about what they're not telling you, secondly, many have a review with no other supporting mechanisms in place, such as training, such as behavioral definitions, things that you actually observe with performance tiered examples, a calibration process. I'll talk more about all these, and a general process approach. Many organizations are not doing these things. Building on that, many do not follow the HR guidance given to them. and they do things their own way, but then they turn around and blame human resources that performance management is broken. In fact, Mark Efron reported that only 53% of departments support their HR's talent processes. So, performance management and HR is being blamed for a lot of things that aren't necessarily valid complaints. I'm not saying they all aren't valid, but a lot of people aren't really applying performance management as it's supposed to be applied. More on Mark Efron, who's often quoted as a source for why performance management should be done away with. He's actually been misquoted. He says, stop searching for alternatives to traditional performance management and start executing the fundamentals that make this process successful. He's all for simplifying it, but he's absolutely not for doing away with it, and not to the extremes that some organizations are going to with a conversation-only approach. All right, so what are these best practices I've been mentioning? When I talk about a competency-based format, I'm talking about multiple competencies that are important for your organization. There can be core competencies that speak to the values of your organization. There can be functional competencies that speak to a given area, like finance, for example. And then there can be job-specific competencies. All those need to be in place to make sure that you're holding people accountable to what's important for your organization, what's important for that department, and what's important for that specific job. Furthermore, with competencies, given that they speak to the multidimensionality of the job, they also speak to the specific behaviors required for success in that job. The definitions of competencies are defined in a way that's observable, which helps keep the process objective. And they also provide standards of what good performance looks like, what great performance looks like, what not so good performance looks like. Some of your organizations, you may not do this, but this really is one of the best practices that all organizations should be following in performance management. A competency-based approach, being behaviorally focused, helps keep people objective. Secondly, you need training. Why are these competencies important for your organization? That needs to be reinforced in the training and explained and shown how those competencies link to the mission, the vision, the values of the organization, the strategy, how these competencies, why these behaviors are going to help take the entire organization forward. It helps people understand their role in the bigger picture and how they tie into that, how they contribute to it, which in turn is almost an existential exercise, if you will. It helps people see why they're important. In addition to that, the training should focus on things like how to take good notes that are behaviorally based. In my organization, Emory University, we have a system where you can log in at any time throughout the year and record things that you observe in a person's behavior. You can just log into the form, type it, and log back out. It makes it very easy. And you're actually building the review as you go, rather than having to rack your brain looking at your calendar, looking at old emails, trying to recall what's occurred. And more likely than not, what you're recalling is probably only what's occurred in the last 2 to 3 months, which is a shame, but that happens everywhere. In addition, the good training should provide opportunities to practice actually evaluating. In our own training, we've set up multiple scenarios, fictitious employees, where we give trainees these performance logs, we call them, and they get opportunities to practice evaluating this person and then discussing it at their table. What did you see in terms of this person's performance? What competencies did you see displayed? And what level of performance did you see them displayed? What overall performance score would you give this person? That helps all these individuals develop that common frame of reference and how to apply the competencies and the standards correctly. In addition to that, we provide training on bias. There's multiple biases that can enter the evaluation process. We've been talking about bias for years when it comes to performance management and performance management research. And now we're talking more and more about implicit bias. That is an important bias that we all need to understand and increase the self-awareness in it so that we can help mitigate it, so we can help control it, and as much as possible, minimize it. So those are some elements in a good training program. Calibration. What is a calibration meeting? This is a great practice that I encourage all organizations to do. This is where managers get together with their supervisor and they share the rationale. They examine one another's rationale with their supervisor and their peers in a meeting. And then they make adjustments based on feedback. Similar to what I was mentioning with the training, this is another opportunity for everyone to share the rationale for the scores they gave to each person. Their supervisor gets to also comment on it. And again, they get to develop that common frame of reference. And it also is a great way to control for score inflation. You know, some organizations see way more fives than they should. This helps control for that, as well as people that are being a little bit too harsh in their ratings. And in fact, our very own Dean Seditol of Goizueta, this is one of her areas of research, and she's written many articles on the importance of calibration meetings. Multi-source feedback is another best practice, at least at a minimum, the direct reports of a supervisor. Some organizations are going to a full 360 approach, and there's mixed feelings on that out there in the press. Some people think it's good. Some people think it creates too much of a kind of a gaming process where managers are gaming the system. Hey, scratch my back and I'll scratch yours. But I will tell you at a minimum, and this is true for us at Emory, we believe that all supervisors should be held accountable to their leadership. And that supervisor's boss only has a limited understanding of that. They can't be there every day to see what that person that reports to them, who is also in a management role, what they're doing. So by asking direct reports to provide some feedback that goes directly to that supervisor's boss, that gives another data point to ensure an objective evaluation. So I strongly support some at least upward feedback, if not multi-source feedback. There's other situations where multi-source feedback can be good. One in particular I think of is if you have someone that's more of a project management role and they're working with multiple individuals across the organization. It's good to get that feedback on how that person led the project. Were they easy to work with? Did they deliver what they promised, and so forth? So there's another example of where multi-source feedback could be incredibly helpful and lead to more accurate evaluations. What's most important is ongoing conversations. Performance management is supposed to be a process. It's not an event. It's not just a year-end evaluation, and I applaud you if you're doing both a mid-year and a year-end evaluation. That alone is a step forward in the right direction. But those ongoing conversations you should be having with your employees, that's what's truly most important. But you need to have all of it. Check-ins are great. I'm not against check-ins. I think it's a false argument to say that it's an either or, like some people are publishing. It's really a both and. We need these check-ins, these ongoing conversations, and we need these formal events and mechanisms in place to ensure that people are being given some formal feedback and that it marries well with what they're being told informally in their ongoing conversations. And because there are important high-stakes decisions that result from the performance management process. It really is a both and, not an either or. So together, all of these, in my opinion, help reduce bias, improve objectivity, and ensure fairness. Some interesting research from Gallup. I'm sure many of you are familiar with their work around engagement. Marcus Buckingham has written several books, and Gallup has published many other articles. Their 12-question survey has become rather famous. They did some research looking at levels of engagement juxtaposed against the performance management style of a manager. So they have three different styles here, some that focus just on strengths, some that focus just on weaknesses, and some that just ignored giving feedback altogether. They looked at engagement scores for these managers from their direct reports. For those managers that just focused on strengths, they found that 61% of employees reported feeling engaged. 38% said they were not engaged, meaning they're just kind of flat. And 1% are actively disengaged. These are actual acts of sabotage. Some can be very mild, like just stealing office supplies, and some can be much more severe. But that is a thing. There is some actively disengaged employees out there who are expressing their frustration in those types of behaviors, counterproductive behaviors. For those managers that focus just on weaknesses, they found that 45% of their employees still reported feeling engaged, while another 33% were not engaged, and 22% were actively disengaged. And that was 11% of the managers they looked at. And then another 25% of the managers in this study, their style was described as just simply ignoring the process altogether, not giving any feedback. In that case, only 2% felt engaged. 57% said they were not engaged, and 40% said they were actively disengaged. So the lesson here, I hope that you take away from this, is that the worst thing you could do is not give any feedback at all. A good performance management system is designed not only to correct poor performance, but really to help people develop and grow. It's a feedback mechanism, and feedback is so important. And we really need all these processes in place, the formal evaluations, the ongoing conversations, to ensure that people are getting what they need to develop and to grow and to feel engaged. So performance management actually is linked to engagement. So with that, I have another one-word challenge for you, a question for you. What's the first reaction you have when someone says the word dentist to you? Please go to Menti again and tell me what's the first thing you think of when I say the word dentist. Okay, pain is the biggest word right now. Clean, okay, there's a positive connotation. Expensive, sure. Oh, failed doctor. Oh, nitrous oxide, okay. I'm taking that as a positive thing. Expensive, sure. Uncomfortable, yeah. Hesitancy, yeah, I understand that. More uncomfortable. Professional, smiley white, sure. So not unlike the question I asked you with performance management, there are some both positive and negative connotations here, but some of the biggest words I see here are a little bit more on the negative side. Pain, ouch, expensive, oh, bad smells, a root canal. But it is a necessity. Oh, thank you to the person who said that. I couldn't have asked for a better segue. I appreciate that. Yes, performance management and dentistry. Most don't like either, or at least some of us don't. But in the end, there are good reasons for both. They are, in fact, good for you if they are done well. And both are, in fact, intended to be a process, right? You're supposed to be taking care of your teeth throughout the year, visiting your dentist at least twice a year. I go 3 times a year, not just a once a year event. The alternative to not doing performance management in terms of best practices, as well as not going to the dentist on a regular basis, can be far worse. Far worse. It can result in all kinds of unfair treatment, disengagement. and problems. It would just lead to more problems. So in summary, some things I want to leave you with. One, when practiced well, performance management ensures that people are evaluated as objectively as possible, and decisions are job related and fair. That's job related is a key point there. That is the metric, the litmus test for everything in Title VII. It has to be job related. How you select employees, how you evaluate employees, decisions you make from the evaluation processes that affect employees and job applicants. And of course, fair. It has to be fair, treating all people the same and ensuring that they're evaluated just based on their performance and nothing else. Giving people feedback is one of the most important responsibilities of a manager. Performance management ensures that it is done well. This is something I can't state enough either. Despite how painful it is, just like dentistry, it really is one of the most important responsibilities. I mean, you're supposed to be leading through people. If you're a manager of others, you're supposed to be leading through others. That includes giving them the feedback they need to be at their best. And that includes positive feedback, lots of positive feedback, reinforcing what they're doing well, reminding people that you appreciate them, that they're an important part of the organization. How you can't imagine doing this without them. They're an important part of the team. That is so critical, that your role is so critical. I know many of us are working managers. We have work ourselves to do in addition to leading through others. But you are the key player. You know, there's so much in terms of engagement research that shows that the number one reason people leave an organization is because of their boss. You are the linchpin, if you're a manager, between having a good experience or a poor experience. And performance management is part of the feedback. It's the feedback process that ensures that people are getting all the feedback they need to grow personally, professionally, and to have a career. To have a career in the organization, not just a job, but a career. Abandoning best practices will leave the high stakes decisions I was talking about that result from performance management to even more subjectivity. That is a huge potential problem with this conversation only approach. I promise you, it's going to result in decisions that are influenced more heavily by bias. All the mechanisms we have in place with those best practices are to help minimize bias and increase objectivity. Performance management will always have some subjectivity to it, but we try to make the subjective process as objective as possible. That's why those best practices are there. Workplace equity and social justice, it has a long way to go, but the last thing we need is another step backwards. So some closing quotes I want to leave with you. One, if you're not keeping score, it's only practice. What gets measured gets done. What gets recognized gets done even better. If you can't measure it, you can't manage it. And this is a version of a much older saying. It's a Scottish saying. Oh, what a gift the giver gives us to see ourselves as others see us. Last but not least, injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. I really am concerned that a conversation-only approach is only going to lead to more injustice. You know, decisions that are poorly made, that are made based on biases, and ultimately will lead to unfair treatment and litigation. Lawsuits. And I've certainly seen that firsthand myself.
Thank you, Randy. This has been super interesting. We actually have a lot of questions coming in, a lot of people who want to know more about this topic. So one of the things that's come up from a couple different of our attendees is a question around how do you separate reviews from raises when the company's not in a position to give raises? Often employees and managers feel there's no point to a review if it doesn't come with a raise. And we may, given some of the other questions, add into that just in general, if it doesn't come with a reward of some sort, whether it's a raise or a promotion
Sure.
or some other.
Yeah, thank you for that. We actually grappled with that very situation here at Emory, and where we landed was to still give performance reviews. And the reason why is because there's so many other decisions besides just merit increases that result from it. But what we did do is we really emphasized even more the importance of using performance management as a tool for development, giving people the feedback they need to grow in their career, talking with people about where they aspire to be in the future, and helping them improve, and using performance management as a part of that process. And in our organization at Emory, we have our performance management competencies defined in a way that they are linked from in different levels, from non-manager to manager to senior leader. So you can actually see if you're coming closer to being ready, let's say for a management role, based on where you're scoring today on your competencies. So it actually does directly tie in to career development for our individuals. So that is where we landed at Emory. And I think that's where some other organizations landed too. But I've also heard of other organizations that decided not to do it because they weren't giving merit increases. I understand that rationale, but I'm just sharing with you the rationale for why we decided to move forward with evaluations at Emory.
Thanks, Randy. I want to sort of combine a couple of questions. The first is, it is relatively easy to define good and great attributes for management type activities. How do you set up a similar rubric to assess standards of various leadership attributes? So coaching, setting direction, motivating. So that was one question that's risen to the top here. And it's connected to another question that was in the chat, which is, can you talk, or even better show, what a great performance evaluation form looks like? And the person, Bill Gentner, says, I've so often encountered these 8-page behemoths that just suck the life out of you. Great one-pager that accomplishes the same goal. So again, rubrics for assessing leadership attributes, and then do you have a, how do you translate that into a great performance evaluation form?
Sure. So at Emory, to address the first question, we just decided, and I'm so glad we did, it's something I've been wanting to do for a long time, to put together a completely different competency model for what we call leadership levels. So basically director and above. It doesn't always translate that way. We've got some people that are below director, but these leadership competencies were deemed more appropriate. And we've got some people that are above director or at the director, but leadership competencies were not appropriate. One of the key variables there was whether or not they managed others. We do have some people with director title, just as an example, that don't manage other people. I won't go into all that rationale, but I'm just sharing with you. It's not a pure one-to-one, but we developed a leadership competency model that speaks more to leadership competencies than management competencies. So it's interesting that coaching was mentioned, because that's actually one of our competencies, coaching and developing others. A lot of managers, one of the things they get tripped up on is still doing the work that they used to do. A lot of leaders, I should say, when they were, a lower level manager or even a non-manager, and especially at that leader level, we want them delegating and directing and coaching rather than doing, rolling up their sleeves and doing that hands-on work. It's not that they won't still be doing that from time to time as the need arises, but more and more they should be leading through others. So they should be leaders. So that's one of the competencies we use to define leadership. There's other things like being more strategically focused, thinking about the long term, looking across the span of our organization, and how the mission of your given department ties into the larger mission, and whether or not people are aligned with that and going in the same direction. There's other competencies like that speak to being more of a leader. And so that's what we did. We just went with a completely different model to reinforce the appropriate leader level behaviors. Now, the second question, how do we avoid an 8-page behemoth form? Well, we abandoned paper several years ago when we went with an online process. We use a tool in PeopleSoft at the moment, and we're actually considering other tools, because there's been so many great advances in performance management software. We're looking at software as a service to tie in that utilize these check-ins together with the regular forms, and they also tie into career pathing systems, and even tie into performance management automatically into talent management and succession management practices, so that it's all integrated and linked, and it makes it even easier to log in at any time and just jot down a quick note, or even send a message of praise to someone through the system. You know, if you want to give someone some public praise, you can log in and do that, and it sends it to the individual and anybody else you want to share it with, and also is recorded for you so that you can tie it back into the performance review. So my advice there is abandon paper as soon as possible, because these online systems make it so much easier, so much easier. And I will say, in addition to that, I have seen some organizations go a little too far with competencies. I recommend no more than, let's say, a range of 7 to 10 competencies at the most. I've seen some organizations have 15, 20 competencies that will easily produce an 8-page or longer behemoth type of form. That becomes unwieldy and unhelpful. Keep it between 7 and 10 at the most, and that will make it manageable and give more it will enable more meaningful feedback to be given.
Thanks, Randy. Another question that we have, can you speak a little bit more to how social injustice directly impacts the performance management experience for employees in a systemic way?
Yes, absolutely. Systemic is actually a key word there. That's why we have all these best practices in place that some organizations are abandoning. I mean, there's been, in addition to the recent social press, I mean, social injustice, lots of unfairness and equity in practices in the workplace. One case I worked on, I cannot share the name of the organization, of course, but this organization had pretty shoddy practices. They weren't necessarily doing anything intentional per se, but they had shoddy paperwork, inconsistent practices, which led to disparities in the workplace in terms of people and how they were promoted. There was some disparities in terms of percentages when you looked at it by race and gender, in terms of number of promotions and how those were given, and together with the shoddy work that was done in terms of the process of performance management, that did lead to a lawsuit that was successful for the plaintiff. So the defendant had to agree to a 5-year series of steps that they had to follow to address all those things. It was far more than just paying millions of dollars in back wages for denied promotions. It was employee opinion surveys year after year and studying differences by race and gender. A total overhaul of the process, of course. Lots of different things that resulted from it. And we learned later, because I was working with the defendant, we learned later that the plaintiff said to the attorneys, we knew you guys weren't intentionally trying to do anything bad, but your system was so poor, your paperwork was so shoddy. We knew we had you. We knew we had a solid case. So, of course, the attorneys won big time with that. I share all that as an example of what can occur with poor performance management. I mean, there were in fact problems. There were people being unfairly denied promotion opportunities, and that's just wrong. That's just wrong, period. And that's what's going on in other organizations. That's what I fear will happen again. I mean, we're returning back to the days pre-1964 with some of these systems where all you're having is just nice conversations. That's just going to result in more bias, more people being unfairly denied opportunities. So that's where social justice ties directly in. We're already, being reawoken to all the injustices going on right now, and abandoning these best practices in performance management. That's why I said I really believe it's a step backwards. I hope that answered the question.
I think it did, Randy. And this one actually builds on it, which is, what is your view on forced distribution or forced ranking as part of the calibration?
I am not for forced ranking. I think that's a bad practice. One of the underlying message with the forced ranking process is it suggests that your selection process is not very good. I mean, it's perfectly possible that you do a great job selecting the right employees for the position. It's not, and I know I'm talking out both sides of my mouth here, because I talked earlier about inflation of scores. But having a forced distribution introduces other problems. Jack Welch was famous for his practice of cutting a certain percentage, I can't remember the exact percentage, every year, regardless, even if there was inflation, the bottom such and such percent. In fact, I think he did use a forced distribution. He would just cut them out year after year. But that just speaks to the fact that you must have a shoddy selection process if that's the case, if you can do that. But I don't believe that. And I don't believe even GE had a shoddy selection process. And it introduces other nasty potential behaviors that can arise of trying to game the system, win favors, and things of that nature. We've tried to control, and we've been fairly successful in controlling inflation of scores. Instead of using a forced distribution, having good training in place, reinforcing the message that a 3, a middle score, which we define as media expectations, is not a bad score. It's a 3 is not a C, is what we sometimes say. But I'm not going to say we've been 100% successful, but we've definitely reduced the inflation in the past. So what's most important is that the scores accurately reflect the performance of the individual. And if you have a calibration session, I promise you, you're going to further reduce the inflation that many organizations see in their distributions of performance management scores. That together with training.
So Randy, that does actually lead to the next question, which is, what should take place at the calibration meetings?
Okay, so at the calibration meeting, this is when, let's say, a director and managers, okay? And then below the managers are the non-managers that report to these managers. So the managers meet with their director, let's say there's 5 of them, and they discuss their review. So prior to having the sit down formal review with each employee, these managers share what are the scores that they gave to each of their direct reports and the rationale for giving that score. And they go around the room all sharing that. And throughout the process, the director may interject. Other peers, because they can hear the rationale used, they can make adjustments if needed, or they can share, well, that doesn't sound like a 5 to me. I only gave 1 5, and that's because this person did this and this and this. And some of the colleagues in the room may have worked with individuals.
Randy, are you there?
Did we lose?
Are you there, Randy?
Yes, I'm here.
I'm not sure if I lost you or you lost me, but anyway, thank you. We've got time for one last question. If your organization has a competency-based performance evaluation process, as well as annual goals that are set and mentioned in that performance evaluation for the year, do you recommend, is it appropriate to make a goal around improving in a particular competency, or should goals be more around job responsibilities and projects?
Oh, I think goals can be both. I think they should be both, but particularly if they're doing poorly on a certain competency. Let's say communication. That's one I see a lot. A lot of people could do better than they are in communication. It could actually absolutely be one of their goals. And there's nothing wrong with kind of having a merge of developmental type goals with more metric type goals, like improving sales by a certain percentage for the next year. There's no reason why you can't have both. You can have multiple goals, and I'd actually recommend it. So with a thing like a communication goal, you could put in there some specific activities like attending some training, practicing certain techniques, maybe getting a mentor, things of that nature. So yeah, absolutely. You can have competencies and improvement in those competencies as goals in addition to more traditional business metric type goals.
Well,
I hope you heard me that time.
yes, we did. So thank you so much, Randy. We have got we still have 14 questions that are unanswered, and there was probably one or two in the chat that we missed too. So this is, this is a big topic for everybody, obviously as managers, as leaders, and also for people, everyone in an organization who's being evaluated through a performance management process. So every leader also goes through this process. So it's not only important, but it's critical for us to get as right as we possibly can.
Absolutely, thank you.
I did want to just let everybody know about the upcoming Business Over Breakfast sessions. The next one is going to be around the intersection of strategy and innovation, which where organizations thrive, with Scott Sanchez, who's coming back to lead that session. And then we have Jamie Turner on the 18th, the unspoken rules of leadership, and Edward Queen, the business and the common good. Do companies have a duty to country? So three very intriguing and interesting sessions for the rest of February. Again, just an invitation for you to look at and investigate the upcoming virtual courses and workshops. These are all live online learning opportunities for you, honing your strategic decision-making skills in how to approach problems like a management consultant, making sure that your finances are healthy and you're not having to work till 80 through the financial fitness workshop, effective growth through emotional intelligence, which I mentioned earlier on, design thinking for business innovation, some research that we did just recently put growth and innovation as the top challenge for organizations today, and the perennial favorite, negotiations and conflict management, which might actually fit in well with performance management, Randy.
Yes, it does.
So please look at those and see if any of those are intriguing and you'd like to join us on those. So again, thank you for everyone for joining us. Randy, any last minute thoughts?
No, I just appreciate all the great questions and for you being a part of this today. I hope I persuaded at least some of you to not go to a check-in only process, and that you see the merits of these best practices and ensuring equity for everyone. Thank you.
Thank you.